Hey, Stefan.
Hello, Roland.
Yeah, for many people, it will be surprising to see us together. And it's been a while. We haven't seen you in public. So what have you been doing all these years?
All right, so basically it's the third time that we are going to cooperate. So let's see what the outcome will be. So maybe to what I have been doing. I went into early retirement almost 10 years ago. And then I went back to university where I did a bachelor in philosophy and with a minor in astronomy and astrobiology, so something completely different. And then I was in different projects, and then by coincidence we ended up to run into each other again a couple of months ago.
So maybe also for people, there may be people who don't know you at all. So maybe we should say how we met the very first time. So we both worked at Swiss Re, right? And our key topic there was, I think we were like the first generation to create these global tools. And you are, of course, the OG of reinsurance pricing. So most of what is still in use today was probably written by you.
Well, it was not written by me, but it was written with people like you, basically in our department, right? This is what happened. So basically, yes, you say correctly, we had global infrastructure, global tools, where we use a common approach for pricing, but then also to have a kind of a standardized approach for dealing with reference data like interest rates or exchange rates and these kind of things which were used consistently across the company. Also to have a consistent approach how to do an economic valuation of the business and to collect all this information. So by centrally collecting all this infrastructure is what we developed at the time. Yes, so this was more or less 25 years ago.
Yeah, for me it was very, very interesting. So the internet was brand new. And essentially all I knew before I started my job was these internet pages where the photos loaded in like 2 minutes in chunks. And then we had the idea, well, let's use the internet for, creating global tools. And it was also an interesting time because Swiss Re always had a lot of money during this period, and we could really generate a lot of budgets. My guess is that today also these budgets, they are no longer there. So I think it would be very difficult to do something like what we had done at the time.
Yeah, it's maybe one is the budget, but I think they still have budgets, but they burn it in a different way.
Yes.
But it was also the mindset of the people in leadership positions. They were open to these changes. They were also initiating certain innovations. So basically, under this setup, it was relatively easy to develop all these things. So which maybe today, it's, I've been away from 10 years, so it's difficult to tell. But it's what I see from the outside. I can imagine it's not so easy anymore to do similar developments as we were able to do at the time.
Yeah. So there was clearly this spirit. We want to act as a group. We don't want to compete with ourselves. We want to know what's being done. We want to collect all the data centrally. And I think at the same time we came into a time where Swiss Re was really we had the power in the center to do all of this. And I think today this is also very often, this is not given. So you work in federated environments where it's quite difficult for the group to collect information.
Swiss Re went through an interesting transition at the time. You see, before it was kind of a corporate structure where there was a holding company with different independent legal entities all over the world. And suddenly then management said we want to have divisions, business divisions, and we don't care about the legal entities anymore. We want to business were oriented towards different lines of business, life and health, P&C and the like. Then we had, of course, our new divisions like corporate solutions and so on, so which were created at the time. And in this transition phase, there was a lot of room for improvements. And I think this innovation phase also from the whole company where they went into the transition, this is probably not the case anymore. or we don't see it. And this is also enabled a lot on our level then to implement new concepts and new technology and to support this transition of the company.
And so after your retirement, you started programming again, you told me.
Well, yeah, this, as I said, in philosophy, I didn't have to program, already little. But as a minor, I did astronomy and astrobiology, and this one was computational astrophysics, for instance. And there was also part of it was the program. And what most of the students were using was Python. I was not familiar with Python at the time. So I tried, and then I realized to do my homework, I would spend much more time in learning to program. Then, so I went back to what I knew. This was Visual Basic for applications. So I implemented my things in VBA. But then later I said, yes, Python sounds like interesting. So I started to engage myself in learning to program in Python. But I mean, as you also know, if you want to do this, you need to have something tangible and say, okay, now I want to implement something. And then there was an old idea I had from my Swiss times. So I said, this is one area where I would be great if you could find a solution there. So I had this in the back of my mind. So I started to implement reinsurance or pricing related modules. And this was for me a learning path. And then I started to use Python also for other things. And then eventually I ended up developing this idea to a level where I was able to write the paper and to publish it. And this is how we then came together again.
Let's maybe give a quick glimpse of this to the audience. So this is the paper, and actually you picked not an easy topic to program, but this is you all over. You started with the most complicated and with topics that were never solved. So can you tell just in 2-3 sentences? We will have other podcasts where we speak in detail about this. But in a nutshell, what is this about?
Okay. So in reinsurance, let's talk about P&C. Let's leave life and health aside. There's basically 2 approaches for pricing. One is you take the loss experience, so this kind of experience-based rating, and then you take data from, let's say, the last 10, 20 years, depending how much submission data you get. You take these past claims, which are no longer relevant or no longer representative for the future, but somehow you project all this to the future, and then you put the model around it, and this model is then used for pricing the future. So that's one approach. Another approach is to say, okay, we want to use exposure. So let's say, how many risks do we have in our portfolio? How many property, how many buildings do we have? How big are these buildings? What is the sum insured? What kind of buildings do we have? So you take the exposure. Or let's take another example. If you take credit and surety, you want to know which risks do I have, and then what is the default probability of these risks, and then so you take the exposure, and then you try to model the future by projecting first the exposure to the cover period, which is in the future, and then you have models behind which you use, so exposure-based models, and then you come up with all the statistics you need for pricing your contracts. But these 2 approaches are independent, and what I try to do is to combine them into one integrated, consistent framework. So this is basically what the paper is about.
And you are leveraging the most modern methodology, right? Because essentially what you do is you leverage machine learning to do it.
Yes, yes, you can say this is kind of work with also machine learning, or at least approaches which are also used in machine learning. So the basic idea is to say we try to have at the end it works the same way as the brain works, kind of. That's also why I made a reference to some models which are used in neuroscience. So the basic idea is to say we try to emulate the outside world, and we generate as many. So with a random generator, you can produce as many simulations of the future as you want, and then you take the simulated data and you compare it with your history. So you basically try to emulate what you have observed, so going backwards, and you emulate the last 10 years, let's say, in your model, and then you compare with the observations. And if at the end, then you use also algorithms like Bayesian inference and the like, then to calibrate your model. And once you have a calibrated model where you cannot differentiate your observed data with the simulated data, then you have basically all you can do with the information you have. And this is then what you use for pricing. That's so the basic idea.
Which is also pretty consistent with what we did 25 years ago, because we came into an area where the computer didn't exist, more or less. So when I started at Swiss Re, I remember there were still people working with millimeter paper, and a lot of methodology was done in a way that you could then take the curve ruler and you could measure things, or you could... at least you had some methodology to compute some integral. And then my generation came with a computer, and we said, hey guys, we can integrate numerically, and we can solve all this by the computer. And now essentially, so it's at least my perception in the industry that the current methodology is not super dissimilar from what we left 25 years ago. And so this is what intrigued me when we re-met, and when you showed me this paper. Now, I think it's time to acknowledge that today we are again a step further, right? So we have now bigger compute, we have neural networks, we have much better machine learning algorithms. So we enter dimensions that were unthinkable 25 years ago. And so I think it's also time to revisit this methodology. Do you see this happening in the industry?
Well, I'm far away from the industry, but I mean, based on the reactions I have on my paper, I think there is very little interest to make any changes at the moment. But the question is also, what is the reason for this change? Is there a benefit? And what I did is I did an analysis of some published data from a big reinsurer. So we can also give the name because it's public. So it's the EVM results of Swiss Re. And just looking into the results of the last 10, 11 years is what they published. You can see that there is a lot of bias in the pricing. This initially, when we implemented all the framework, the idea was to remove the underwriting bias and to have an independent assessment of the risks and of the cost of the risks, and then to have a separate entity which is kind of marketing, which is then selling the product. But what we then experience is that the underwriters, they have so much pressure to produce positive pricings, so there's always some room for judgment. So basically, there is also an underwriting bias which is moving in parallel to the market cycles. And I think with this kind of technology, you could at least reduce the bias and reduce the uncertainty, which gives then two benefits. One is you have a better risk selection, so you can have a better bottom line result, of course. And second is you also can avoid adverse developments, or at least drastically reduce the adverse development, because when you underprice the business at the time of underwriting, then of course the claims will eventually come, and then you have to increase the reserves. And this is of course what you don't want. And these are the two big benefits in my view. So of course you need technology which was not available 20 years ago. You need much more computer power, but this today is no discussion. This is available. So this transition is feasible if someone has really the motivation and the incentive to do it. Yeah.
Well, what I see, just pure random observation, is that very often young people are quite interested in doing the next step. So I think the generation that comes now and the people who enter the profession today, I think this generation is again very similar to how I experienced my professional entry. They come with all this knowledge from everywhere and with this wealth of also what all this AI brings today. And I really think there is a generation coming that wants to actually change something. And this actually also motivated me when we met for lunch and you showed me this paper. And then it motivated me to say, hey, Stefan, let's bring it out in the world. Let's try to show what it is. And let's see if we manage to convince anyone to give it a try.
This maybe brings us to your situation, because you also have when you left Swiss Re, then you went to Converio, you developed similar things, but then you founded your own company. Then with this one, we come together the second time, and you provided some technology which we used in Swiss Re. And then we basically had very little contact, and now we are back here with to launch something new. So maybe you can a little bit also tell about your story, which is also quite interesting, and what is your motivation to go now in this direction, and what you expect or what you hope to be able to accomplish going forward.
Well, I think it's already interesting to understand what brought us together the second time. So not this time, but the second time, because it was a system, it was called RDS, Reference Data System, and similarly to this name, it was, it was not a very loved tool, I would say. It never really, before it never really had a proper owner, or it was always a bit done at the side. Even though it was a very difficult system to do objectively. But I know it from when I was there, because of course also, like people like me, we love to work in the rocket science, mathematics, and we didn't want to do these mundane things like, administering, say, a list of lines of business, right? And it took me a few years to understand that actually this was almost more difficult than designing all this mathematics, even though the mathematics looked more like rocket science, and I was proud that I could say I develop mathematical models. But then I understood that the actual complexity is in administering all these thousands and thousands of small things. And maybe just to also illustrate the problem set, when you take a parameter which depends on, say, line of business and country and currency and I don't know what, and then you just see the sheer amount of combinations you have, because it's multiplicative. And then you get into millions of different combinations. And when I look at when we started the thing, so I was heavily involved when we started it, then we just multiplied out the whole table, and then you got a million entries, and then we patched over single lines, and no one knew anymore what we were doing, right? And we kind of understood we need a better system. And so when we met at that time, this must have been in 2011 or something around there, then you told me, hey, Roland, can you help me improve the situation with this, right? And this problem intrigued me, and it's a problem that still sticks with me, because it's enormously complex. And I think in the first go, we really tried to completely centralize the whole thing. So we managed it from your department, and we really collected all the data, and we built this monolithical system. And then we just noticed this is unmaintainable. We cannot do it centrally. We have to decentralize. And when you want to decentralize, we need the technology. And this was pretty much the technology we built in this. And then we were, the first 5 years, we were really in startup phase. It was when we did this RDS Plus, it was called then the successor project. And it was then... At the beginning, it was really very, very difficult, but it was then a success. And I remember we could turn off the old RDS Classic in around 2016. I still remember the party we had. And then we came into what's called transition phase. So we went so you differentiate normally 3 phases of a company: startup phase, transition phase, and large phase. And transition phase we entered around 2016. And so we started doing accounting projects. We needed to get ISO certified, ISAE accredited, and we got more and more. We had to hire staff like chief information security officer and, all these like large corporate things. And then in 2020, COVID came. And so with COVID, since we had a lot of insurance customers, they just stopped all their projects. Whatever they were doing, they stopped doing them. And so essentially our whole sales pipeline broke down. And you see, so we could always work very well in terms of, over the internet. We had a decentral company. We were used to this. But what I couldn't do is I couldn't sell over the internet. This was impossible. And so then we had like a 2.5-year sales gap when after COVID we could have lunch again with people and we could physically meet people. And then we really tried very hard to generate a sales pipeline. And I would say around fall last year, I was very confident that we kind of managed turnover, that we could generate enough pipeline, and that we could go back to our old business. But you see, so in these times when everything is very tight, actually something small that happens can cause the whole thing to collapse. And so this something happened last year, and then we understood we have to let go. And around this time of the year, we had to then do many business plans to hope to save the company in any setup. And then by Christmas last year, we decided we can't do it, and we released all the staff, which was a big tragedy. So it was very sad at the time, but it was unavoidable. And sometimes in life you have to let go. So then we had, of course, till March, we had the notice period. And so as of April, we are now gradually starting to ramp down everything we had before. The company still exists. I'm still the CEO. But currently we have to really start over. So we are again in startup phase.
So maybe when you mentioned the development we did in RDS and RDS Plus, and then you explained from there the history of your company, but maybe also for the audience it would be helpful to maybe mention a little bit what is the scope of RDS, or what was it, and because many people are maybe not familiar with it. And I mean, just from my side, what we had, as I mentioned, is global tools, but we also wanted to make sure that we are consistent in the pricing, independent of the tools which you're using across the organization. If you take interest rates, then we should use the same interest rates if you're in the US or in Europe or in Asia, or exchange rates. Or if you talk about other parameters like cost of capital, which is part of the economic valuation, then we also want to make sure that everyone is then using the same baseline. And of course, this data has to be updated periodically. So we make sure that everyone then starts to use the new data when they're available. But then sometimes you want to go back into the history and do the passing based on old parameters. Then the organization comes and says, oh, now we change the line of business. So the categorical data is changing, which basically used to attach all these parameters. So this is just just in a nutshell, the complexity which you mentioned. But then you, of course, you had then to implement this. And I think this maybe is also an example for what we might be doing in the future, isn't it?
Temporal versioning. I will never touch it, Annika. It's I think there are smart people and stupid people in the world. The smart people, they take very easy problems that look very difficult and they solve them. And then they get a big effect. So with versioning, it's almost the opposite. It's the hardest problem I've ever done, this multi-temporal versioning. And this one I will definitely not touch anymore. But where you are right, of course, is the idea to decentralize data management. I think this is something that surely we will do. And when we re-met, and so there I have to probably spoiler already some of our conversation later on, but I said, hey, why don't we do a pricing tool? So you created this methodology, why don't we do this? Then you said, but we will need to do some RDS plus of some sort with it, right? And then I made you actually read a book. It was one of the books I read this year when I started. So this year for me it was very good because I could finally do a bit of intellectual thought work behind scene, what I'm actually doing. And one of the good books I discovered is called Data Mesh, and I made you read this book. So what did you think about this book?
Okay, that's interesting. It's a new concept in how you handle data. So basically, instead of having everything centralized, as you mentioned, you start with a decentralized approach. But of course, then there's other questions which come up. So you still want somehow to make sure that this data fits together. So you need some governance around the whole thing. But at the end, you give the ownership for the data to the units which basically create the data. So they are the owners of it. That's one of the basic ideas. You treat data as a product, so it's not simply something which you send to a central data warehouse or data, and then it is disappeared, and you have nothing to do with it anymore. So basically, you own the data and you need to kind of sell it to the other parts in the organization as a product. And of course, you need to maintain it, make sure that the others can use it. So I think it's a quite interesting idea. For me, what was a little bit more unclear by reading this book, I had the impression, yes, it's a concept, maybe we on a level where you as a consulting firm maybe would go and try to sell it to their clients, but the implementation of it was missing. So I haven't seen an example where this is already implemented and where it's working. And this is maybe, then I was also asking you, are you aware of this kind of any company who is already using this technology? Because it's relatively new, it's a few years old. You can find it mentioned in the internet, but you never see an example where it's really working. And so this is one of the questions I have. How do you see the chance? I mean, you have now built your system, which is basically using this technology, but are you aware of any company who has implemented a data mesh in the way it's described in this book?
Only on paper, to be honest, because on paper all the ideas look very good, but in a nutshell, the ideas are very similar to agile programming. It sounds all very good in theory. Let's just be agile. Let's just do things quickly. But obviously in practice it's highly difficult. Nevertheless, it's an idea that has been following me since the Swiss Re days, because in the old days we still were doing waterfall processes, right? So we wrote specification, then we gave them to IT, and then they implemented it. And so for you, this must have been a nightmare, because you are someone who always wants stuff tomorrow. And then this was also where we had quite a big cultural clash at the beginning. I remember this, because you wanted stuff tomorrow, and I had to tell you, hey, with all this, aircraft carrier I have to move around, I need like 2 years to do such an idea. And I think at the end you also kind of gave in, and you saw that it takes like 2 years to move the aircraft carrier. But I never liked to operate the aircraft carrier. It was always very, very difficult for me, because like you, I want stuff tomorrow, right? And so I think a lot of ideas I took from Wikipedia, because if you look how Wikipedia works, I think if you had like a central editorial team that would try to govern the whole thing, Wikipedia would never have happened, right? And then you can say, well, you cannot have something like an encyclopedia where anyone can edit. It will never work. This is one of these things where I think which is counterintuitive, because actually it did work, and it worked much better. I remember at the beginning we had these big things like Brockhaus in German, and we noticed they cannot compete with the quality of Wikipedia. And so I think the same holds for data management. It's the exact same idea. People have a goodwill to curate their data, and they want to do it. So what I loved from the book is the idea, if I have data, if I want to make my data available to the organization, I can just publish it. And on the other hand, if you want to consume data, you have a way to discover it. And then I can communicate you under which conditions you can use my data. I can, for instance, write, I will update my data 4 times a year. And then when you, and maybe I write even on which days I will update my data. You can, as a consumer, you can see, do I like this? Do I not like it? If you like it, you can just start consuming. You never even have to tell me that you consume, right? And this was very much also the idea behind RDS, that we could just, ramp up new departments. They can put their stuff in, etc., etc. Even though at the time, I mean, we are speaking 2011, microservices was not even a term that was used. I think microservices, it came around 3-4 years later. So we were building monoliths, and I think in monoliths, this is a big problem. And you see, this is, I think, where the book is just essentially it's brushing over the biggest thing, because the big thing is, how do we get rid of the monolith? How can we distribute the infrastructure in the company? And I think there she doesn't give us any hint as to how she would do it. So I agree completely with you on the kind of a disappointing notion, even though I think you can get a lot of good ideas out of the book.
I'm also trying to, or when I was reading the book, I was trying to say, okay, what would it mean if you would try to implement this in the environment which I know, so in the reinsurance environment, and just to mention or to go back to what I mentioned before, when you say suddenly finance comes and so on, says we want to have new lines of business, or we change the structure of the lines of business tree and these kind of things. Then of course you cannot simply do this in one small area. You have to implement it everywhere, and this requires some coordination, some governance around it. So these things are still necessary. And of course, she mentions the governance and say, yes, you need basically to bring these teams together, and then they have to harmonize. But do you think this can be done without a central body which basically then ensures or enforces the implementation of these kind of changes across the organization? Because otherwise suddenly things don't fit anymore.
I think if technology is good and actually supporting, Wikipedia was not enforced by anyone. It was just practical. And I think in companies, people are actually looking to have something like this. I think no one likes to keep Excel on a shared drive, even though both of us, we know 90%, 95% of the data in insurance companies kept in Excel on shared drives, right? And I think that's just the way it is. I have not met anyone ever in my company who said, this is brilliant, I want it this way. I think everyone would want something else, but they don't know how to do it. And now you see, so I got very inspired on the one hand by this Wikipedia idea. On the other hand, this is also something we noticed when we re-met this year, that we watch similar podcasts. And so I was watching a lot of Lex Friedman's podcast, and especially so I really liked his early episodes where he brought all the OGs of computer science. And I was very intrigued by all his series with Donald Knuth. I think it's around 4 episodes he has with Donald Knuth. And Donald Knuth, he was already, when I started in your department, he taught me how to program. I read The Art of Computer Programming. Most of my algorithms I took were from one of these books. And Donald Knuth has, next to him being a brilliant computer scientist, he's also a brilliant author. And he coined this term literate programming, where you actually, you write a bit, you program a bit, you write a bit, you program a bit. And it's something that has intrigued me for many, many years. So at Systemorph, we had a technology called Systemorph.cloud, which is the tech stack we developed during COVID. So this was a cloud-native tech stack. It doesn't run anymore, but it was all notebook-based. And so we still have, for instance, the IFRS calculation engine. This is on GitHub. We can put the link in the description of this video. And this was written in this technology, but the way we wrote it is in form of these notebooks. So you can even see it here. And when you see then everything is a notebook, and even on GitHub it would render the notebook. And in my opinion, this is the best way to bring code and documentation together. When you do things like this, we have others where we show all the calculations. I need to find a good one. And so you can then have an optimal documentation here. You can write texts on what you are doing, but at the same time you keep the implementation. And we didn't have then this other implementation as well. This was the implementation, and I think that's the best you can do.
This was prior to MeshWeaver, right? So is this basically already in a similar setup, or would you now want to migrate it and implement it in your new framework? Is this something which would be difficult, or is the concept more or less already implemented in the earlier version, and so it's just a kind of a software migration?
So Systemorph Cloud was obviously a cloud-native system, and it took a lot. It's like a cruise ship, so you cannot just be the only captain on a cruise ship. You need all this crew to operate it, and obviously, so actually, we had lots of clients on this platform, and so at the beginning of the year, we also had to make offers to the clients what it would mean to keep operating the system beyond beyond March. And we noticed there is no way we can operate this system cheaply. So the cruise ship, you need all this stuff, you have all these functions. And then actually I was quite inspired by music theory, and then I started taking courses on how to write orchestra works on piano, and this fascinated me that, I took a lot of solo jazz piano courses, and I learned to play it alone. Then I did same with the software, so I took this cloud native system, this huge software, and I did a solo piano version of it, which is called MeshWeaver now, right? So this is a technology that you and I can operate. So it's really written for us. And so the second thing that I understood is if I want to find coverage of the software, I have to open source it. And so this is very much what I intend to do now. And so we have now this channel. So if you are interested in this topic, please give us a like on the video. Please subscribe to the channel. And you will see a lot of content where we will teach you exactly how to work in this style, how to do this, how to operate the software in this style. And then you see, so what I took from Knuth again, is that, at the end of the day, what do we want, right? So we want some kind of text-like thing. So I took here, this was still done when we still had programmers here. This is a data set from Microsoft called Northwind. It's a test data set for test databases with some, e-commerce setup and e-commerce data. And I've kept using this data set all over the place. And then I said, hey guys, they never wrote an annual report for Northwind, right? So let's write finally an annual report. And it was actually a very fascinating experience. So actually, you see, we did very much what I think would be a nice annual report and what we would do. And we used a lot of AI to do it, actually. And then I said, well, you see, so these static reports, they are boring, right? So you get a PDF, you download it. I want to have it interactive, right? So every manager, we know this, managers like to play. So I said, well, then, let's make the tables interactive. Let me play with the table. Let me do things. And like this, I can actually present my content in a very appealing way, right? So it's not just I send you a spreadsheet, but I give you a very appealing way to do this, right?
Yeah, and you mentioned the usage of AI in supporting you in the programming, and you asked me before about my experience in going back to learn to program in new language. I said, yes, I did it in Python. It took me quite some time to become familiar with Python. And then you say, oh, but here we use something different. We use C#, but we have the Copilot, which is supporting the development of software. And I was first a little bit skeptical. How is this possible? And then you showed me a few examples. And then I was like, okay, maybe in a certain context, this Copilot is very helpful, until I started myself. And then I was baffled what this technology is capable to do today. So I don't have to go to any handbooks and check what is the syntax for doing this or that. I just tell the Copilot, I have this problem, can you provide me a solution? And then it writes me the entire code. Then of course I have to check it and to see if it does what I want. And maybe in some cases I just take it as it is. In some cases I go and maybe modify it. But I was also able to use some modules which I had written in Python, and I asked the Copilot, can you translate this into C#? And it just gave me the whole code, and I just could implement and use it. So this is incredible what the technology, or the advancements of the technology in the last maybe 2-3 years. And what kind of support it gets. So in the case of, if I compare now, how long did it take me to learn C#? This was maybe a couple of weeks to be up in a certain level, which before it would have taken me a couple of months or even longer. So this is basically, even in my age, it's possible to learn a new programming language. And I think with this kind of support, I can imagine also for young people who are maybe a little bit hesitant to touch a computer, not in using it, but basically go to encode it. This is maybe the hurdle is much lower than it used to be. What do you think?
It's gigantic. The step is gigantic. And I don't think we are at the end. And I'm not speaking about creating AGI. I don't believe in AGI myself. I don't think we will ever reach this. But I think also there is no need to wait. I think what we have today, it's good enough. And we should stop whining that the cars can't fly. It's already good that we have invented a car and we have to learn to drive it. For me, I still am struggling even how to dispatch tasks. So at the beginning, I had kept actually a couple of programmers from Systemorph, and they were very senior programmers. So I didn't take juniors, and it was people I worked with for 10 years plus. But you see, we had more problems how to dispatch tasks. Because, for me, it's a very different way of working, because before, let's say even you work with a junior, right? So you give the junior a task, then the junior disappears, say, for a week. And also in this week, my mind gets swapped out. I have many other topics, many other meetings. And a week later, he comes back and says, look, now I did X, Y, Z. So first you have to put your mind into it again, right? And then you have to follow again what he's doing. Now I iterate this in like 1 minute, okay? And then you see, so my problem is, as soon as I can formulate the task precisely, I put it to Copilot, I get the result insta, and then I can essentially develop a feature over, say, 1 hour instead of, say, 3-4 weeks before, right? For me, it's a very different way of working. And actually, it came to the extent that I had to say, I really don't know how to work with other people at the moment. I need to kind of relearn my own job. And I'm saying this after having managed teams for many, many years. I don't think I ever worked without a team. It's the very first time in my life I don't have a team. But at the moment, I feel like I cannot absorb a team. I have to first learn myself how to work with this tech.
It's interesting because I came from a different angle. So you mentioned when we first were interacting, where basically I came back from the US where I was for an assignment for 2 years, and then I came back, and then your team also was then part of my department. And as you said, for me it was difficult to understand why it takes so long to implement a certain application, because when I developed tools, I was basically a one-man show. So I could do everything together. So if I had an idea, I implemented, and 10 minutes later I could give it to the users and say, now you have a new version with this feature in it. So this was the way I was used to work when I was basically myself responsible for the software. And then suddenly, we had these bigger projects, and people are telling me, oh, it takes, as you said, this is waterfall, a couple of years or at least a couple of months to do more or less the same what we did before. Of course, not at the same level, but the functionality was comparable. So this was for me really a big hurdle to start to understand how these models or how this approach is working. And if I look now what you are doing, so basically we're almost back at the time when I started, when I was able to basically implement an entire application myself, right?
Yeah.
So this is kind of course, it's but on a very different scale. Now I can do projects which require maybe 10 people before. As you say, you can do it yourself within a much shorter period of time without needing to coordinate. And I think this is probably the big advantage of this technology, right?
Last year, so we were tops, we were way beyond 50. Last year, we were still probably around 50 people. When I look at my speed today alone, I think I'm as fast as last year with the 50 people. Mm. And when I look at the quality, I think the quality is higher because, because I'm alone. So I have a super consistent handwriting across all the parts. And this is something, even if you take a lot of care that you have a team handwriting and if you have good code review processes, but it's just the sheer amount of people who interact with this, and you can never get to the same level of, it's this. First of all, it's just the sheer amount of code. I think I could reduce my code base by at least factor of 10, if not 100, So you have way less code. It's way more consistent. It's way more compact. And I think eventually it's higher quality even. And it completely fascinates me. And now we come back to the data mesh idea. So I think really at the moment it's bad to work in teams with like 10, 20 people, at least if you work with AI. So if you keep working like before, then I cannot say much. I think there in this way you need this much people. But if you really embrace AI today, I think you are best off working alone or in teams of 2, And then with a data mesh, you can then generate hundreds and thousands of one-man teams, right? And I think this is much more efficient than trying to create one team with 10 people. Maybe also to finish with the MeshWeaver page. So you see here, I also wondered then if we want to do such a page, what is then the best way of doing it? And I again come back to the Wikipedia, because Wikipedia has created this markdown format, right? Which was, or maybe they have not created it, but they have popularized it, I don't know. But I think there is quite a big industry consensus that Markdown is the next text processing message. So I said, well, then obviously we need to use Markdown. And you see what you can do. So you can even add headers to Markdown. So I can give hints how you should index this. I can even put some styling info. Then it's quite easy to put headlines, especially for people like us who come from something like LaTeX, and we are used to this kind of almost programming style, and this much more lightweight than LaTeX, so I prefer it by far. And then I said, well, let me just spice up the format a little bit. So this one here, this is my own syntax. Let me zoom in a bit. So this is my own syntax, and I said, well, with the @ sign, I stole it from the Blazor technology of Microsoft. They use the @ sign a lot to render content. So I said, well, so let me separate my software in layout areas, I call them. And so maybe also to illustrate what the layout area is. So I could now really take this product overview, and now I can actually separately get this layout area. So I can, for instance, I can say here, I want just this area. And I say it's from the north wind, and it's this area name. And then I get just this table, right? And this is how this tech works. So, and you see this means, because again, these reports, and you know this from your former times, till you get to such a report, it's not just taking some data and putting them in a table, but you have to worry about exchange rates, you have to worry about interest rates, you have even these names, these speaking names, they don't ship with the data, you need to get them from somewhere. So every such report is a little bit like a composition. So that's also why I started doing composition theory, and I swear it made me a better software developer, because I started understanding it's like voices coming together, and the report is like you play a song, right? And to the same extent that I want to take the song from Apple Music or wherever, and I want to just listen to it, and I don't want to buy a guitar and a drum and a manual how to play the song myself, right? And it's the same holds for me for a data mesh. For me, it's not interesting to get the raw data and then this kind of cookbook, how I have to cook this report up. But I want the finished report, and I want it with all the interactivity. I want this combo box. I want to be able to do this. And then the only thing I have to do is I have to include it, and I can even specify parameters. I can say, I want the report only for 2023, and then I can continue writing my markdown. And I think, Donald Knuth is still alive, so I hope if should he ever see this, I hope that he would recognize his idea, because I'm really trying very, very hard to realize the ideas of Donald Knuth with this literate programming. And just to finish it, now you see, so the difference between creating a program and, writing a page, it gets almost to zero, right? So you see now, if I write this page here, I can just upload it somewhere, it's deployed, right? And so it has no more deployment process, it has no more nothing. The governance you can still put, you can still say there is someone approving the page before it goes live or whatever, right? So there is any amount of governance you can add to this process. But just technically, it's really as simple as deploying a page of Wikipedia, right? And I think this is where I see the future of data mesh, that the company can just do it themselves. They can just, bring their own data, and everyone can make these reports. And I can start, you see, if I'm the CFO of Swiss Re, right, I would then serve maybe 500 tables, maybe I would serve 2,800 charts, and whoever, wants material from me, they should just consume any of the official things. They can just consume the charts. I can give them interactivity. So for me, this is a data mesh.
I mean, you just mentioned the CFO's history. Now, if I think of a complex history, maybe there is some information where you have, I think it's implementing the data mesh just as a thought experiment. You have many, many different sources of data. You bring it together. Now, in principle, you say, yes, data is a product. I make it available. Anyone who needs it can have access to it. But once you start to aggregate the data, maybe there's a certain level where you say, oh, now we need to be careful who is allowed to see all this information, because certain things you cannot, for also legal reasons, you cannot disclose. So you need to put some governance and orchestrate who has access to which data at what time and the like. And how difficult is it to implement these kind of governments where you also give certain people more rights and other people have less rights? Is this something which has to be done centralized, or is it something you also delegate to the owners of the data, or how would this work in this new setup and this new framework?
I think obviously you need some kind of policy how you do it. But in terms of the implementation, we actually had this project, maybe you remember, it was when I worked for you, there was a group project called Role-Based Access Management, right? And my big learning from this project was whatever they did, it didn't fit. It was a bit like the shoe with Cinderella. Everyone had to cut off a toe or a heel, and at the end, literally everyone was unhappy with the thing. So in my opinion, if you try to centralize this, even in, we already said at the beginning, Swiss Re was a very centralized organization. So if anyone, Swiss Re would have had a chance. If you take primary insurance, they are much more federated, right? So in a primary insurance, you don't even have, oftentimes you don't even have a centralized directory, So you can completely forget to say, even the user accounts are not known at the global level. In my opinion, you have to forcibly decentralize even the notion of access management, because who knows best? Who should see the data? The department that produces the data, okay? And in my opinion, it's, us being Swiss, right? We had Duttwiller with a micro idea to cut out all the intermediary and just say, okay, at the end of the day, we produce the food, and then we have the people to buy the food, and we provide the stores to do it, right? And in my opinion, this is very much also the idea of data mesh. It's my data. I know who has access. I need to technically do it, but technically it's never, you see, so as soon as we could say we have access rights, whoever wears a red shirt, whoever wears a blue shirt. As soon as I can implement groups for whoever has a red shirt, whoever has a blue shirt, I'm fine, but and this is again the mesh idea, because I don't need to go to the central team and say, hey, you need to build me groups with blue shirt and red shirt, but I can just do it myself, and then I can say, okay, and this data is visible by a group with red shirt, right? And in my opinion, it's the same thing holds. Decentralization, it's the big idea, and the centralization always leads to this kind of boiling the ocean project.
Would you be able to convince a chief risk officer or the operational risk officer that this is still, that they can still do their job?
It is, would I be able to convince the ones that are currently in these positions? I don't know. Is it possible objectively? Yes. I'm saying this having done ISO certifications for many years and ISAE, and my company was very much built in this way, But eventually you can, if you do this kind of normally this is all rule-based. So you can define normally your own policies, and you have to convince the auditor that given the policies you applied, first of all, that they are applied in the company, and that given you apply the policies, that it leads to an accurate result. And I normally I ran into open doors with this approach with auditors. They love this. They love this over, big books of rules that no one follows, And what they hate is when you violate the rule. And when you do this Cinderella approach where you have to cut off a toe or cut off a heel, you always slightly violate the rules, right? So I think objectively it's easier to justify such an approach. However, it could be that for political reasons, it's easier to say, no, well, let's keep cutting off the toes and the heels. We have always done it this way, right?
Because what we see quite often is that, there is more and more governments imposed in organizations. And this is what I experienced in my career. At the beginning, it was almost nothing, and suddenly this became a huge topic. And what you see is then is managers always try to push the responsibility downwards. So basically they say, okay, I have here some governance which is defined, and if it fails, then it's the people below me who are to blame for it. And this probably would also require completely new thinking. So there was also different responsibility and ownership which people in a managerial position would have to take, right?
You know that we built a counting system, right? So we built really, highly audited stuff. So the thing I always try to promote, and I was actually I was very lucky in terms of the persons I've worked with, like yourself and other, visionary people. So what I tried to always convince them is that another word for governance is collaboration. And actually, as soon as you tell the people you have to follow governance, they hate you. Mm. As soon as you tell the people, I give you tools to collaborate, they love you. And it's actually the same thing. Because at the end of the day, and this is again Wikipedia idea. So if you look at the Wikipedia discussions behind the article, it's quite heavily combated, especially, my guess is if we look now at the article about Musk, there would be tons of edits and people fighting each other behind the scenes. So I think people have an urge to do correct work. So I think if you give any collaborator, if you give him the opportunity to comment on his data, ask questions to his data, they are actually quite diligent. They want this. They want to say, I believe this and that about my data. Actually, that's all you need. That's
basically
governance.
What you're saying. You say you need some principles, and then you give the ownership to follow these principles to the people who are in charge of the data. That's exactly the approach, right?
Exactly. And so for, what we did in many enterprises, we completely re-implemented their business processes, So they usually had very clunky close processes. And I started noticing at some point, you just need to think of quality gates, So if we do, even in a closed scenario, even if we have to work very fast, and very carefully, but, the first time we upload the data, it's completely random. And we have to just take it what it is, Then I say, okay, you have to see the data from minute one. I upload, I see the report, The report could be good, it could be bad, I don't know. And then from the very beginning, I can start commenting on the reports. I can say, this number looks off. And you can say, well, but we sold this business and blah, blah, and we can find where we are, right? So, but from the very beginning, we have to work on the live patient. I think you have to be able to reopen the process whenever, and then you have to have quality gates. So we say, okay, this is a minimum quality that we have achieved. Now we officially give it over, for instance, to the reviewers, right? And then the reviewers take over. they can then say, hey, this is not good enough. They can give it back. They can re-ask questions. Then you can reopen again. You can resubmit data. It can pass again this first quality gate, go to the reviewer. Till then, you cascade up the quality gates, and this is a bit company dependent, till obviously eventually the CFO signs off that these are the financials that you publish in the annual report.
I mean, I always try to implement the philosophy. I said, if the one who produces the data is going to use it himself, then he has a big interest to make sure that the data quality is good at the source. So if I can just say, okay, you need to deploy some steering data into a system and then disappears and someone does something with it, then nobody cares. You just put any crap in there to satisfy the process, but not the content. If you are the one who then basically can use this data for your own purpose, to run your business, then of course you will have a completely different interest. So is this kind of I hear the similar approach in your words, basically making sure that the quality is ensured already at the source. But this is also the idea of data as a product, and to give the ownership of the data to the producers to make sure that they have a big interest in their own data, right?
Yeah, in the country you must not touch thereafter, right? And this is also part of the hygiene. I will never touch your data. I will question your data. I may say that you have to correct an error or whatever, but I will never touch your data, right? So it's part of the hygiene. And the other thing is, we don't comment in emails and then the comments get lost, right? Or we don't comment in this other system. So we have to be able to comment where the data lives, right? Because this we also know in all these large corporates, even if you have like a SharePoint or a Teams room or whatever, right? These things, they go with the organization. And today you are in department 1, tomorrow you are in department 2, and the likelihood that you and the SharePoint stay together is 0, right? So at some point the SharePoint, it drifts off to some other department, and then you lost your documentation. So you have to see that you keep everything together with the data, and you see this is and then you electronically sign it. So the customers we had, first of all, it sped up their close process by a factor of 2. It's not exaggerated. And you see, so people who participated in the close told me, look, before you came, every close we had this chicken farm, and people ran around and it was loud and people did overtime, and then you came and then everyone was sitting at the desk 8 hours a day, and this is what you have, and people love you for it. It's a win-win-win-win-win. The auditors love you. Even the audits, before they had to produce extra Word documents and stuff, we just produced them the Word document at the press of a button from what they had submitted anyway, right? And then also even the auditor, So the only thing the auditors can do at the end is sample your work, right? So you can tell them the principles based upon which you work, and then they can say, okay, now I want to create 30 samples. You have to now show me how you dealt with this issue or with that issue. But then you see, you have all the evidencing is all electronic. It's all there at the push of a button. So even audit times are reduced.
How far away are we from a CFO saying, okay, I want to know what is the state of my company today? He presses a button, and then within, let's say a few minutes or maybe an hour, he gets an annual statement at this point in time, which in principle should be possible if all the information is there. It's just about aggregate and bring it into one final report, isn't it? Or do you think there are still many places where people have to manually interact to produce these annual reports? It shouldn't be necessary.
It depends what, right? So this as well from our previous work. I think and this is again very much this data mesh idea. I think every piece of data has a life cycle, right? And so, for instance, we had at Swiss Re, we had the capital allocation. And this we did, I don't know, once a year or twice a year, but it was infrequent, right?
Yeah.
And then during the rest, you just leave it stable, but it doesn't matter. You just have to know, and same goes, in the close in IFRS, you have to create a cash flow model. But you have to anyway create the cash flow model till infinity, right? And so essentially you have all the projections inlined, and so we had built this. So we because if you give me cash flows from today till infinity, of course I can produce you any future balance sheet with this. And in our software, you could do this on the fly. So you could really say, I want the balance sheet from 2035, and we gave it to you. Obviously, you had then no more a notion of risk in there, right? Because you just compute the expected, and it's then difficult to say what actually materializes, but you could again put the Monte Carlo on top. It's all doable, right? And so I would claim that we were there even, but it's how many are there? I don't know. So I see a lot of, especially IFRS, I see a lot of implementations that were not well done, so they bought some system that was very expensive, and then all the money was used up. And I see many companies have some form of Excel battle now, and then they feed like ready-made results in the system. And of course, in this system, you are of course miles away from push of a button. But we always try to, create it, in a way that you can just even for scenario computation, you could just say, okay, now I upload you way higher interest rates, and you saw what your balance sheet would be. At Swiss Re, we did it with as if renewals, right? Maybe you can describe how this process worked.
Okay, so let's try to put it into a nutshell. I mean, a company like Swiss Re doesn't have millions of policies. It's maybe a few 10,000 if you take also individual risks. Contracts, treaties, it's a few thousand, so it's not a too big amount. And the big advantage was that we had all the treaty business, or almost, let's say 98%, maybe not 100%, but most of the treaty business was in one application, which was the one you built. It was Concept. So you had one place where all the information was stored. And then whatever we could do is two things. We could say, okay, now when we have a new version of the application, let's rerun the new version and check the results against the old results to see if the tool is working correctly. So it was a quality assurance for the tool itself. But the same technology could also be used, as you mentioned, to do as if reports. So let's say if the parameters are changing, if you have new internal expense parameters, you have new exchange rates, you have new capital cost parameters and the like, what is the impact on the portfolio? What is the impact then on the pricing, but also what is the impact for the group? If you said now we grow certain parts of the business, we maybe shrink other parts, what does it mean for the group risk model where everything comes together? So this is exactly the kind of scenarios you're mentioning, which were possible once you had this framework in place, which before was even not, people didn't even think about it. I mean, when I started, the whole underwriting was basically done, and then the company was flying blind until maybe 1 year or maybe even later. There was accounting came with the results, and then the annual statements were produced with a huge delay. So basically, in the meantime, we were at the next renewal before even knowing what happened in the previous one. And this, of course, this gap between taking decisions and steering the business and so on, this was, of course, much shorter. So there was a much closer loop, which is, I think, a big benefit of the companies who have this kind of capabilities, so they can continuously monitor where are we and what would happen if we do this or this or this. So this is the exactly kind of scenario or as if calculations which we implemented. Yes.
And I still see very few players who have it. I think there are a handful of players maybe who have this kind of thing, but I still see for the majority it's still a lot of handwork. So let's maybe come to the last piece of this conversation. So what are we going to do with this channel? So what is the intention? So we need to motivate our spectators why they should subscribe to us, and maybe also a motivation to everyone who has made it this far into the video. If you want to give us inputs, if you have topics that you would like to see, that you would like to have discussed, please drop us a comment, and please write us in the comment what you would like us to do. So what we said is, obviously we need to do something with what we know, right? And where we have obviously a lot of knowledge is in this reinsurance pricing area. So we will also start something there. When I look what's out there in terms of tools, there is not much. There are a couple of tools available commercially, but they are all in the style of, the stuff we had written 25 years ago. And I think also this doesn't fit anymore in today's age. So for my part, I'm looking very much forward now to building such a tool. So we said we want to build such a tool, and we want to even open source it. So I'm a big believer in open source software, and I think people, it will also help, especially young people who come into the job, who want to learn how to program. It will give them examples of people who have programmed for a couple of years on how to actually do it and how to do it in a professional way. So I think this will be the main thing, the main format we will do here. So we will have two formats. One is this communication, so this conversational format that we are doing now. The other one will be that both Stefan and I, we will program for you guys. So we will try to do it as live as we can. And also show you now, given even given a very complicated pricing tool, it's considered probably the most complex thing you can build in a reinsurance company. So, so if you want to program, you have to learn to program on like real life patients. So you will not come to our channel and learn how to do a to-do app. There are 10,000 other channels where you can learn how to do a to-do app. We don't need one more, but there are a few channels where you learn how to approach a complicated problem. And so I'm very much looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to how do you do this in the age of AI? How do you design a UI in the age of AI? Is it really contemporary to create these huge forms like we had 20 years ago? Can we create a chat interface? So what can we do? So you see, we are committed to building such a technology, open sourcing them, making them available for you, and more or less developing this technology live, showing you the methodology, showing you how to write computer simulations, how to write business logic, how to write RDS, the data management and everything around it.
I mean, for me, it's like three components. One is the goal for me, in the first step at least, is to say, okay, I have put these ideas into this paper, and I've written down how to solve the problem, and I now would like to implement it to show really that this is working, not only with a few simple demo examples, but with real in a real setup. And so the intention is to build all the components which are necessary. So of course you need, it's a stochastic model, so you need probability distribution, you need to do simulations and the like, so to have all these components in place and then to put it together. But then there is, you already addressed something. One is the reference data, but also once you are running such an application, you need to store the data somewhere, so the interaction with some storage is necessary. And this is something which I have done very little in my past. I have much more experience. And the other part is you need to expose the functionality to the user, so you need a kind of a user interface. And you also said maybe the old approach is not the right one, maybe there's different ways to do it. So I'm really curious also for myself to learn what kind of capabilities do we have to use the calculation engine, if you want, which is for me always the simple part. For other people maybe think it's the most complex, but for me this is the easiest part. But then to use it and to expose it in a meaningful way to the user, so the user can enter his data or get it from some source and put it into the system. So all these interfaces, this is with the user, with other applications, where if you get some email with an Excel sheet with submission data, how do I put it into my application? All these kind of questions, which are also interesting, which maybe we will not touch in the first step, but hopefully eventually we'll also be able to address, right?
Well, I would surely start them rather sooner than later, because I think for me this is you are more fascinated by the mathematics behind. So this is something where my interest shifted. So we still have very good discussions about it, and I still like discussing mathematics, but it's not where my heart beats. So I notice, for me, I want to really relearn how to do stuff in the age of AI. So I think what we have today, it's already worth a lot. And I'm very keen on this data mesh idea. So for me, pricing is more, I obviously I need some kind of content, and it's better content than Northwind, right? So for me, it's a replacement of Northwind by some more intelligent content. But for me, clearly, the key ideas are how do you design user interfaces? In my opinion, we don't know how this works today, right? So we are, and you see there, I experience again this pioneering, like when I started at Swiss Re, when the internet was new, and we were the first generation to see what can we do with this internet. Now the AI is new, and we are like first generation to try, okay, so what do we do now with all this AI? And the other bit is, I think when I look at the data situation in almost any company I know, they have tons of data on shared drives, on SharePoints, in files, PDFs, Excels, you name it. And in my opinion, there will be a huge race now, because machine learning, it became a commodity. So we see this, you can take almost any problem, you can quickly with Copilot attach it to some machine learning stuff, and boom. But you have to have the data, and you cannot necessarily work on data you have in a PDF, right? But I see that the AI also helps us now to structure the data. What I before, if you had told me even a year ago, how long does it take to build a warehouse for a big company, I would have said, well, decades, centuries, I don't know. Nowadays, it's very interesting because I think there are a few things that LLMs really excel in doing. So for me, LLMs are the new search. So and we know, I never use Google anymore. I almost exclusively search in AI. So for me, it's clearly the successor of search. And I want to also search my own data with it. On the other hand, it can very well classify and pre-structure stuff. So I'm very keen to start projects where we can ingest terabytes of PDFs, Excels, you name it, anywhere. And where we can try to use LLMs to extract out structured data from it. My claim is LLMs, they do an 80% accurate job, right? So you have no chance to know which 80%, so it's just about trying it out. And I cannot tell, will it be, what value will it generate? But in my opinion, already, to have something which is then searchable, and to say, for instance, I want all the deals which had a premium higher than XYZ, and I just get a list. I think this is valuable. This is valuable information, right? And so I'm very much looking forward also to start such projects. So I want to work very much with AI, bring very much all the state of the AI in, and also to this pricing tool from the very beginning.
Because what will be necessary in this framework, which I described in my paper is you need to go and take submission data for the last 10, 20 years, depending how long you want to go back. And you take also the submission data. On one hand, so you have claims data in there. So you have to go take past claims data. You have to take past risk profiles and these things. So everything which is available, the structures. So you have to somehow do exactly what you mentioned. You have to go into your files, find out old Excels, maybe you have another repository, and to extract all this information for the, let's say, not only the last 2 or 3 years, but maybe the last 20 years, yeah. And then once you have this, then you can basically then apply this technology. So this is, I think, where if we really manage to combine these two things, then I think we'll have a very strong system which we can basically then present to the world, right?
Yes, and in my opinion, it's always when you have these tech revolutions, there are also always market inversions. It's a bit, there is a good book, Inside the Tornado, and the title suggests already that inside the tornado you have different physics. You know, it's not the gravity, we know it, right? So and tech revolutions trigger this tornado effect, which changes physics. And so, before iPhone was invented, we had telecom companies called AT&T and Nokia, and they were market leads, and then boom, the iPhone came, and the new telecom companies were called Google and Apple, right? And in my opinion, these revolutions will take place everywhere in every industry during AI, and it will be a huge race. And the first one who wins the race will have the market monopoly. And my fear is that many of the traditional insurance companies will just be too slow. They will wait forever. And you see, this is again where the mesh helps, right? Because if you now start this central warehousing project to collect all your data, and it takes 10 years, it will be all over in 10 years. Someone will have overtaken you. You don't even need to start. So you need something which you can more or less start today. You can more or less deploy it in your entire organization. And you see, there is a bit of a random element about it, right? So it could be that you would like this and that department to be faster in terms of creating this content, and then this other department is faster. There is a bit of a random notion, but I think at least you see stuff grow, and you can hope that you can manage your garden in a way that the right things grow in the right speed, right? Which is not easy. But I give this approach much more probability than a centralized approach where you do first 2 years of tech evolution or tech evaluation. So whatever we know from before, we would have had to do first 5 years of tech evaluation, and only then we could start. I think if you do this today, because these data stores, they come all over the place. There is something new every day. You never know, is this the right, is that the right? I think at the moment it's like skiing in the fog. The only thing you can do is keep your knees very soft, and you don't see the hills. And whenever you notice, oh, this was bad, this is a bad direction, you have to go back and take another direction. But you have to be very nimble if you want to stay on top of the wave. And if you don't stay on top of the wave will come and it will take you down. So I think for this first conversation, I think we reached quite a good point. So I would like now to start very quickly also the second format, and start creating first content, also educational content, where we bring now this pricing topic, right? But so my idea really is I want to do also very basic videos where we explain what is a Monte Carlo simulation, why is a Monte Carlo simulation something good to use to model financial processes, etc., etc. I know from you have a ton of topics you want to bring, and things that you have done. Maybe you can also highlight 2-3 of your topics.
Yeah, I mean, if you, of course, you mentioned already, let's say, probability distributions. Yeah, of course, you don't have to program them themselves. This you can find in libraries and so on. But what I need in the context of this new setup is I need to be able to modify these distributions, so based calibration parameters. So you need to add additional methods to these objects which are already there. So this is maybe one topic. Then I have probability distributions which you don't find in the library, which we'll be also cover. And so these are at the beginning some components I would like to present, and we will try to do this in small pockets, so we don't make a 1 or 2 hour session, but try to do it in a small, maybe 10-15 minutes topics which we cover in one session, and then we can do it step by step, right?
Yes. All right. So I'm very happy we re-met. I'm very happy we can do this together. It's a lot of pleasure for me.
So we had 2 successes so far. Let's make the third one.
Yeah, let's make the third. Yes, it looks like you are probably even the collaboration of my life, right? So I don't think I had 3 interactions with anyone else. Well, I hope that with many I will have more interaction, but so far we were successful. Yes.
You see, we changed the roles. So first I was your boss, then we were partners, and now you are my boss.
Yes. All right. So with this, thanks all for staying so far into the video. Again, if you want to support this channel, please like and subscribe. Please write in the comments what you would like to see from us, how we can bring the topics that you want, and keep weaving.